Welcome to vintagesf. I'm Richard Rempel, and today I want to take a look at one of the greats of science fiction, Alfred Elton van Vogt, or as he was more popularly known, A.E. van Vogt. What I want to do is take a look at his story, but I also then want to take a look at a facsimile of the July 1939 issue of Astounding Science Fiction that includes his first published story, Black Destroyer. And the cover image is from his story. I also have a magazine just 3 years later published in Astounding Science Fiction, his story, The Weapon Shop. This is from December of 1942. And his Weapon Shop stories were collected in The Weapon Makers. Now, I have this particular copy because it happens to be a signed copy by A.E. van Vogt. And after I've just done a short profile of his life, we're going to take a look at some quotes by Robert J. Sawyer in his brand new book on science fiction. This just came out in August of 2026, and here he says a couple of things that really credit Van Vogt with being the greatest of all time in terms of science fiction writers in Canada. So let's just start off with a short bio. A.E. van Vogt was actually born Alfred Elton Vogt, no Van. He was born April 26, 1912 on his grandparents' farm in Edinburgh, Manitoba. All that exists of this town now is a plaque for their cemetery. His father was a lawyer, and his family moved a number of times throughout the prairies in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba, but eventually for high school he ended up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, my hometown. While in Winnipeg, he met Edna Mayne Hull, who was originally from Brandon, Manitoba. In 1939, after selling his first science fiction story to John W. Campbell of Astounding Science Fiction, the story Black Destroyer, Van Vogt married Edna Mayne Hull. With the outbreak of World War II, Van Vogt tried to enlist, but he was ineligible due to his poor eyesight, so he became a clerk with the Canadian Department of National Defence in Ottawa. After a year and a half in Ottawa, they moved to Toronto. From Toronto, they eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where he was a professional writer. Here we can see his application from 1952 to become an American. And you'll see here, near the bottom, that his original name is Alfred Vogt, also known as Alfred van Vogt. The story is that the Van Vogt came into being when one of his first stories in Canada was published with his last name spelled incorrectly as Boat, not Vogt. So he thought the alliteration Van Vogt would make sure that that didn't happen again. So this is the beginning of Van Vogt's career. There's much more to tell about his story, and I may do that in another video. But one thing I do want to mention is that his wife was a science fiction author as well. She published primarily under the pen name E. Mayne Hull. Planets for Sale from 1954 may be her most famous novel. And some of A.E. van Vogt's work was with her as a collaborator. Now, perhaps their most productive period, not necessarily by quantity, but in quality, were in the years leading up to 1950. I may talk about this in a future video, but at that time, editor John W. Campbell Jr. and writer L. Ron Hubbard were starting to explore Dianetics, and A.E. van Vogt and his wife were involved in that exploration as well. This had a lasting effect on their careers. But I want to go back to looking at Robert J. Sawyer's book and a couple of quotes from there about A.E. van Vogt. Canadian science fiction. Never heard of any, eh? Well, if you saw the American movie Alien, you've had a taste. Canadian author A.E. van Vogt won an out-of-court settlement against the producers of that film because of glaring similarities between it and his 1939 classic Black Destroyer. Van Vogt's alien menace, the wolf-like coral, appears in statuette form on the annual Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Awards, of which he was the first recipient. Perhaps the most famous of all Canadian SF novels is Van Vogt's Slan from 1940. This story of mutant humans struggling to go undetected in the far future was penned in a modest house in the suburbs of Toronto. Slan was first published as a magazine serial in Astounding Science Fiction from September to December of 1940, and then published as a standalone hardcover book in 1946 by Arkham House. In 1996, SFWA's Grand Master Award went to A.E. Van Vogt. By coincidence, that same night, this is Robert Sawyer speaking, won the Best Novel Nebula for The Terminal Experiment. At the end of the banquet, aboard the Queen Mary, I sought out Van Vogt. We'd never met, I explained to him, but he had been an inspiration to me. This guy from Manitoba who'd published 600,000 words of science fiction with major U.S. publishers while still living in Canada had been proof that the goal I intended to devote my life to, being a Canadian science fiction writer, was possible. A.E. Van Vogt looked warmly at me. Then his face grew sad. You know, he said, I remember having been a science fiction writer, but I can't remember a single thing that I wrote. By this point, Van Vogt, whose 84th birthday had been the day before, was in the grips of the Alzheimer's disease that would kill him. Alfred Elton Van Vogt passed away January 26, 2000, at the age of 87. Now let's turn our attention to the start of the Golden Age. This is generally thought to be from 1939 to 1950, when editor John W. Campbell Jr. reigned over the field of magazines. Astounding was the premier magazine for science fiction, and his stable of writers was unparalleled in history. Many mark the start of the Golden Age with the July 1939 issue of the magazine. A facsimile of the July 1939 issue of Astounding Science Fiction, Black Destroyer by A.E. Van Vogt, is the cover story. This is a hardcover facsimile from the Southern Illinois University Press from 1981. I was able to pick up this copy at Baca Phoenix Bookstore in Toronto. This was in their downstairs section where they have used books. The original price they had on here was $12.95, and it was going for $8. I thought that was quite a deal, and I was quick to pick it up. Let me just see here if I can remove this sticker or if I'll need to do some additional work here. It looks like it's coming off pretty well. There we go. Not really any residue there either. And as you can see, we have the novelettes, short stories, articles, and addenda. And there were reminiscences by Isaac Asimov, Ross Rocklin, and A.E. Van Vogt, people originally published in this magazine. And this is from 1981. Let's take a look in here. The original magazine was edited by John W. Campbell, and the memoirs are edited by Martin H. Greenberg, and forward by Stanley Schmidt. So we have the forward here, January 1980 by Stanley Schmidt, and here is the issue. What I love about this facsimile is that it includes everything, including ads. And if we look at this issue, some people that you might recognize in here, of course, we'll talk about Black Destroyer by A.E. Van Vogt, but also C.L. Moore, Greater Than Gods, and Isaac Asimov's first science fiction story for Astounding magazine, Trends. And so the story and the author I want to talk about today, A.E. Van Vogt's Black Destroyer. A coral, a large, immortal, intelligent, and tentacled black cat-like animal, considers its near-future starvation as its food source of id creatures has been hunted to extinction. Just as all seems lost, a spaceship lands near an abandoned coral city. He quickly surmises they are a scientific expedition from another star, which excites him as he considers scientists to be unlikely to harm him. He approaches them as if simply curious. The human expedition is first concerned about the coral's approach, but he shows himself to be intelligent and attempts to communicate via radio waves. But the coral plans to hunt and kill the men. This becomes a story of kill or be killed. And then the second story is Trends by Isaac Asimov. A new author presents a new type of obstacle that may face the first rocket ship's inventor. The minds of men did not always run as they do now. So the magazine continues in this fashion. And here's the C.L. Moore story, Greater Than Gods. If a man could see the end of his act, the end that comes at the far end of time, and know what it meant, would men be greater than gods? And here in the epilogues we see On Black Destroyer by A.E. Van Vogt, Concerning Trends by Isaac Asimov, and On John W. Campbell Jr. and Science Fiction by Ross Rocklin. So that's a quick look at A.E. Van Vogt and the beginning of the golden age of science fiction. Now, there's a number of follow-up videos I could do to this one. One, I could take a look at Isaac Asimov's Trends and talk a little bit about his beginning in science fiction. I could also take a look at C.L. Moore's story and talk a little bit about her. I could conduct a magazine tour of the Astounding Science Fiction magazine from December of 1942. And of course, there's Dianetics and John W. Campbell Jr. and L. Ron Hubbard and how that worked out for the Van Vogts. Let me know in the comments below what you might be interested in seeing. Until next time, keep reading.